Well, hello and welcome back to the Life Course. My name is Henry.
And I'm Dave.
It's great to have you joining us for week two. We're now in week two of the Life Course, which we're running here at Christchurch, Gladesville. It's great to have you joining us. The Life Course here, we're in our second week. We've been looking at what is life all about. That's all what the course is about. We spend some time hearing what the Bible has to say about what life is all about, and then give you guys the chance to send in questions that you have. Feel free at any point to send in your questions that you have. The line will come up right here. There we go. The text your question line. Dave and I have the question phone right here. We'd love to answer your questions. Yeah. If we get the chance, we'd love to answer them. But Dave, for those there might be some people who are just joining this week for the first time. Can you tell us a bit about who you are?
Yes, I'm the senior minister here at Christchurch, Gladesville. I've been here for about 6 years now, and I'm married. I've got 4 sons, and I'm getting older, and so are they. And but my wife isn't, which is a wonderful. There's no getting out of that. Henry, start saying things before I get myself into trouble.
Dave is going to be speaking for us tonight. He's already, technically you've already spoken, and we've recorded it and are excited to share it with you guys. And we're hoping that it is helpful for you as you grapple with the big questions of life. And as tonight we think a little bit about what is the biggest problem in life? What's the biggest problem in our world? And what's the solution to that problem? But first, last week we were thinking about what is the good life? What does it mean? Is the good life full of being rich and famous? Is it full of great experiences? What is the good life? And we heard actually from the Bible that the challenge that Jesus was saying that the good life can only be found in Him. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what's next about what does Jesus say about what is the biggest problem in the world tonight. But Dave, the biggest problem in our world, what are some opinions that you've heard about this question?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Henry. There's a number that I've heard. You might think that the biggest problem is potentially inequality. So the fact that there is inequity of wealth and opportunity and privilege, and that if we could just get that sorted out, then the world would be a better place. And of course, there have been societies over the last 100 years that have said, we're going to go about doing that. We're going to make sure that society is flat, that everyone has every opportunity, everyone has the same options, no one is above anyone else. And they have not been the freest or the most joyous societies that we've seen. Other times it's, ignorance is the issue. Maybe people just don't know enough. Maybe if we educated people better, the world would be a better place. And yet where we find, you've got a room where everyone in the room is educated and you're not necessarily getting harmony. So the education itself is not what's going to produce the results that we're after. So you make everyone just as wealthy as one another. You don't provide the solution. You make everyone as educated as everyone else. You don't get the solution. And it's like the world keeps trying to solve its problems, but never seems to be able to do it because people get in the way. And so I think it hints that there is perhaps that those aren't the answers. That the biggest problem isn't wealth, it isn't education, it isn't opportunity. It maybe is something else. And I think what we're going to talk about tonight is the fact that, it is something else. And it's something that is in common with all of those rooms. If you've got a room with fully educated people, you've got a room with people with total opportunity in there, you've got a completely equal room, I still think you're not going to get harmony because there's people in it. Anyway, that's something I think we're going to explore a bit tonight.
Yeah, well, I'm really looking forward to that. But in fact, we might throw over to it right now to you recorded this during the week,
Yep.
and there'll be a couple of times during the talk where a question will come up on the screen, and if you're watching with someone, you can discuss it with them.
Yep.
Or if you're watching alone, you can think about it for yourself, and that'll go on for a couple of minutes each of the times, and then come back to either us or to the talk again.
Absolutely.
But let's play.
What do people say is wrong with the world? And what do people say then is the solution for what is wrong with the world? Now, when we ask the question, what's wrong with the world and what solution, we're going to get answers from a number of different perspectives. So let's think about perspectives for a moment. Have a look at this picture and go, how many women do you see here? All right, so you have a look at it. I suspect some of you might have seen this optical illusion before. You've got one which looks like this red-headed lady who's leaning, a young woman who's leaning with her head to the left, and then others might see an older woman with a chin the size of Mount Everest sticking out the side there. Sometimes when we look at things, we can see things from different perspectives, and often with those optical illusions, you see one and you have to kind of look another way to try and see what the other perspective is. Well, tonight we're going to look at this problem with the world, right, from two different perspectives. We're going to look at from our own perspective on what we think the world's problems are, and we're going to also see the same thing from God's perspective. We're going to see what we think the solution is, and we're going to think what God sees the solution is. But let's start with our own perspective for a moment. Firstly, what tends to be our own human perspective of ourselves when it comes to what's good and what's wrong, right? Well, imagine the ladder, right? You've got a tall ladder, it's got 10 rungs. It's a scale, right? And this ladder is the ladder of goodness, let's call it that. And then the absolute goodness is right at the top of the ladder. The goodness of God, godlike goodness, perfection, right? That's up at the top of the ladder. And then down the bottom of the ladder, you've got full-on evil, right? You've got evil is at the bottom. So you might have Hitler down there or Stalin or one of the usual suspects for those sorts of things. All right, now if there's 10 rungs on the ladder, where do you reckon you'd put a few people? Let's try a few celebrities. We've got this ladder of goodness, 1 to 10. Tom Hanks. There you go, there's a celebrity, everyone goes, we've got to like Tom Hanks. You don't always want to watch his movies, but the guy was Forrest Gump. You've got to like him. I mean, he seems like a nice guy, and all right, so Tom Hanks, let's stick him somewhere there. Maybe 7. We'd say Tom Hanks, he's a pretty good guy. So let's stick Tom Hanks as a 7. All right. What about somebody else? Let's say Vladimir Putin. All right, now, even if you're a Russian who voted for Vladimir Putin, you don't think that he's a squeaky clean good guy, right? You might think he's a powerful Tsar type guy, but he's not. You don't think he's really good. And the rest of the world, well, we think he's actually a pretty rough nut. So let's just say we put him down a 2. Vladimir Putin's a 2. All right, how about this one? And you can imagine that if your mum's in the room, your answer to this is going to matter, right? But that is, where would you say your mum is? Where's your mum on the ladder? Now, I would say, obviously, there are some people who go, I think my mum's down there with Vladimir Putin. But I think most people would say, actually, my mum's pretty good and she'd be better than Tom Hanks, so let's put her as an 8. All right. Here's a question. Where do you put yourself on that ladder? Pick a rung. Have a think about it. Seriously, ask yourself this question: on the ladder of goodness, where would you put yourself? Now, I reckon most people would probably say about a 6.5, but there's 10 rungs and you can't put it in this space in between 6 and 7. So Tom Hanks is taking up the space of 7. Let's go 6. All right, and it reflects the fact that most of us think, look, if we look around and we compare ourselves to other people, well, nobody's perfect, but I'm probably a bit better than average. I'm nicer than your average person. You might put yourself somewhere differently. You might think that you're pretty awesome. You might actually have a pretty low view of yourself. but think about where you put on your ladder. I think we all have a sense that there is good and that there is evil, there is right and there is wrong. And most of us think that we're basically good people. But let me ask you this. That's you. Let's put another person that you know on there, or have met. Henry, right? Stick Henry on the ladder. And let's ask ourselves a different question. Where would God put Henry on the ladder? Now, Henry's a guy, he's working for a church. You know what? God would put him down the bottom. Henry, sorry to say this, mate, you're down the bottom. But you know what? You're not alone. I'm down the bottom too. And guess what? Tom Hanks is down there, Vladimir Putin's down there, your mum's down there, everyone's down the bottom of that ladder. Now, how can that be? Well, it's because Jesus says we've misunderstood what true goodness is. You know, and we don't measure goodness by looking around and going, where do I fit next to the person next to me? There's a different standard that's being applied. So what is it that makes a good person good? Well, Jesus actually got asked that once. And he said, look, there's two basic things that make a person good. And his answer has two parts. He said, the first one is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. This is the greatest commandment. And then the second one is, and the second is like it, love your neighbour as yourself. Now, when we consider what makes a person good, we often think about that second part, right? We often think about how we treat other people, the neighbour bit, but we rarely ever think about the God bit. But Jesus says, actually, that's the greatest one. That's the heart of the goodness issue. See, something is truly good, let's just say it's a car or a phone or even something relational like a friendship, right? When it works the way that it's meant to work, that was made to work. You and I are designed to relate properly to one another. That's what God wanted us to do. Now, we actually all know that in ourselves, whether we acknowledge God or not. that we're built for relationships and that relationships matter and we should do them well. But even more importantly, you're designed to relate properly to your God, your Maker, the one who's given you life in the first place, and to have Him at the centre of our lives. And the sobering perspective of the Bible is that none of us have done that right. None of us has loved God with all our hearts. We just haven't done it. And if you ask yourself the question, you've got to admit, I do, that I haven't. I haven't even done a great job of loving everybody else either. See, in fact, Jesus says something else is actually going on in our hearts. Far from actually loving God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, we're actually doing the opposite. Most of us work pretty hard at presenting ourselves well and trying to be a decent, moral, member of a community, a good person. And we go, I've got my blemishes, but I've basically got a good heart. No, is what the Bible says. Jesus actually calls our bluff. He says this: what comes out of a person is what defiles them, actually makes us unclean, unfit for being in the presence of God. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, folly. All of these evils come from inside and defile a person. I mean, isn't that strong language, isn't it? Defiled, right? Jesus says that the heart of our world's problems is the problem of our hearts. They are, and he used that big word, evil. By our heart, he means it's the core of who we are. Now, do you believe that or not? Well, let me give you an illustration that might help you really grasp, actually, he's got a point. All right, I want you to imagine this. Imagine I could put a GoPro camera, right, not on the top of your head, but inside your head. How about that? And it recorded everything you did and everything you looked at and every word you spoke. But more than that, it could actually record your silent thoughts. How about that? And then put words to them. And it uncovered your motivations. Why you do the things you do, even the mixed motivations behind the good things that you choose to do, let alone the bad ones. And then imagine that I got all of that footage, right? And all of the transcript from all that, all the audio, and just of last week. Let's not make it too big. Let's just make it last week's. And then put it on screens in front of everyone that you know. You would run out of the room. I would run out of the room. I wouldn't want people to see that. Because I know I'd be ashamed of what they'd be seeing. I'd be ashamed of what they're hearing. Because I know that I even fail my own standards. I would watch my own video and go, gee, what are you doing? What are you thinking? I know that I fail my own standards of what's right and good. And if I fail my own standards, well, what about how much I must fail God's, who is perfect and who sees and hears and knows all of it? See what I mean? See, the Bible's perspective, which, if we're honest, I think we suspect might be true, is that actually we're far from good, right? And we're far from God. And one day we're going to face that God, and that God will make a judgment, an assessment. And the Bible doesn't leave us in the dark about this. It tells us now what that assessment's going to be. And it's the one that your conscience is bothering you to say. And that is, he's actually going to find us guilty and he'd be right to do it. We're on the wrong end of the ladder. We stand under God's judgment. And this is the Bible's sobering perspective on humanity. All of us. So if we've failed God, many people think then, all right, well, okay, we've all failed, but we've all failed, right? So surely God's just going to go, oh, well, reset the standards perhaps. You know, and God is loving, that he's just going to forgive and forget. In fact, he should. He should forgive and forget all of this. Well, yeah, God is loving, but he can't simply forgive and forget. You can't just do that, because he's a God who is just. He's a God of justice, and justice matters too. See, we understand, don't we? We get the importance of justice. We're outraged, aren't we, when injustice is done? There's nothing often that gets our blood boiling more than injustice. You know, imagine a man is guilty of murdering a loved one of yours and is brought before the court, and there's absolutely crystal clear evidence presented that shows that he's absolutely guilty on this. But then the judge says, you know what? I'm a nice guy. I'm a loving and I'm a compassionate judge. Just, did you do wrong? All right, well, go away then. Walk away. You can go free. Can you imagine the outrage of that kind of injustice? On what basis can the judge let the guilty go free? It's wrong. No, we want justice done. We want justice served for the evils that have been committed against us. But do we want justice from God? Do we want him to hand out the fitting punishment for the way we've neglected him and others, and even actively treated him and others? Here's the situation. Imagine you're in God's shoes. Put yourself in his position for a moment. It seems that you've got this dilemma, right? You've got two intolerable alternatives that sit side by side. That either God shows us unjustified mercy or unmerciful justice. God is merciful and will forgive sin. God is just and must punish sin. Well, how do those two go together? How can he be both at the same time? How can God forgive those that are guilty without denying his justice? And how can he punish us justly and yet still be merciful and compassionate? Can you start to see how God can't simply just forgive and forget? It can't work that way. Well, the good news is that God has one solution. He's got a solution to it. He's got the solution to the problem of our guilt, and it is his desire to forgive, but his need to do justice at the same time. God has made a way to extend both justice and mercy, and the way is Jesus. At around the age of 33, Jesus fulfilled his life's mission. He died. He was abandoned by his followers. He was rejected by the leaders of his own religion and scorned by his own countrymen. He was condemned to death by a Roman official, though that Roman official had repeatedly found him not guilty. He was whipped with a horrendous cat-o'-nine-tails whip, which was known to kill men in itself. It was that painful, that brutal. He was led outside the city of Jerusalem carrying his cross. Nails were driven through his hands and his wrists and his feet. He was lifted up on the cross, which means that he would have had to move between sagging, imagine with the weight on those nails, sagging down as you got weaker, but then because you can't breathe when you're pulled down like that, you need to lift yourself and push yourself up on the nail that's in the middle of your feet just to be able to get a good breath in. It's torture. And as he hung naked in front of everybody, walking into Jerusalem, walking past you, seeing you hanging there, he was spat at, he was ridiculed. Ultimate shame, excruciating pain, and death at the end. And yet there was something far more distressing taking place. Under the surface of enormous physical, emotional, and social pain, and as he comes near to the point of death, he cried out his final words. And these final words tell us two important things about God. These words show us the love of God, and they show us the justice of God that we've been talking about. And these words are recorded for us by Mark in the original language spoken. And at 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? All right, Jesus died, God forsaken. Now that's a term that speaks of a horrifying abandonment. That's what forsaken means. So it's a way of Jesus saying that he's the feeling of being left all alone and facing the anger of the one for whom all of eternity you've only ever known love from. Now, why would God do that? Why would he pour out his anger on his perfect Son? Well, Jesus was forsaken because of those two things, God's love and God's justice. Now, God's justice, remember, won't let him leave evil unpunished. And so an amazing display of love, God takes the punishment for sin upon himself in the person of his Son, Jesus. So it's God's love that satisfies his justice. Most people's perspective of Jesus is that he was a good man. Most people would say that, who came to show us a better way to live, right? But that's not Jesus' own understanding of what his life was all about. Certainly not the Jesus that you read about in the Bible. He actually tells us in Mark chapter 10, verse 45, for even the Son of Man, that's Jesus' way of talking about himself, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus came to give his life as a ransom. Now, a ransom, you might know, is a price that you pay to rescue somebody who's being held captive, right? Who's in a dangerous situation that they can't get out of. You know, the debt that we owe God is so great that an only infinitely valuable God can actually pay for it. Yet it's a debt that only man ought to pay. And so this infinitely valuable God becomes a man, Jesus, and dies in the place of guilty humanity. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 21 says this, that God made him, that is Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Now let me give an illustration that might explain what that verse is describing. So I want you to imagine that this book, I tried to get a really big fat one, right, with really tiny print, right? Imagine that this book is the record of my sins against God, right? Every lie, every lust, every violent act, you know, the time that I took stuff that didn't belong to me, the moments when I was selfish in my motivations, the times that I neglected him, neglected other people, because remember, God can see your motivations as well. This has got it all in it, right? The whole shebang. In fact, this is just volume 1. It's probably a 12-volume set or more than that, right? Now, I want you to imagine that this is me, and this is that record, and God is here. Now, you know how when you see someone, you can't detach the person you see from the way they've treated you. So what I mean by this is, look, if you walk past someone in the street and don't give them a moment's news, it's because you don't know them, right? That face means nothing. And so you walk past. Imagine that person who's walking up to you is somebody who is your best friend. Well, then you see their face, you reflect upon who they are to you and how they have treated you, and you go up and you give them a hug and you say, it's been great to see you, or you socially distanced elbow knock or something like that, because you don't detach the way they've treated you from you when you see them. But now imagine that person walking up the road is somebody who has done so much wrong against you and those who you love. What do you do then? Well, if you're afraid of them, you'll quickly go look at a window, or you cross over the other side of the street. Maybe you even steel yourself and get yourself ready for some conflict, because that's who that person is. So imagine God sees us and he sees this. He sees all of these ways I've treated him and others like dirt. Well, that is what brings judgment. This record stands between me and God. I don't have the relationship that I should have with him. I'm separated from him, and I'm going to remain separated from him. But imagine this hand then is Jesus. There is no book here, right? There's no book of sin. Though he lived in the real world that we do, he was tempted in the ways that we're tempted. He didn't sin. He didn't do this stuff. He always lived with God at the centre of his life, and his words, his actions, his motivations. Jesus was perfect in his relationship with God and with others. But when he goes to the cross, this is what that 2 Corinthians passage is telling us about. He does this. He takes this book of my sin and a whole lot of others upon himself, standing in my place. And God sees with him what I had earned. And he treats him like I deserved. And he pours out his anger that all of this deserves. Jesus has all of that for me, and he tasted the death that is earned by this, and he dies. No wonder Jesus cried out at the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? But look what's over here. It's gone. It's taken away. So there is nothing between me and God now, no barrier. It was this act in history where God was demonstrating his love for us as sinners. Have a look at this verse from Romans chapter 5, verse 8. This is about what God's love for you is like. God demonstrates his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So let's wrap this up. So Jesus' death affirms what we know to be true, that our guilt is real and that it must be punished, that we fall short of our own standards, let alone those of God. But it also offers what we want to be true, that we can breathe the fresh air of forgiveness, that we can be back in relationship with God. Friends, God offers you, as he offers all of us, this amazing free gift of forgiveness that Jesus has brought for us. But like any gift, it's got to be received. And I'm going to say more about that in the coming weeks. But what I want to do is leave you with this question. Why wouldn't you take the offer? Seriously, what? All that's been done for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. And it's offered to you. Why wouldn't you take it up? What are the reasons?
Okay, well, I don't know what you thought about or talked about as to what would stop you or just any person from receiving God's free gift of forgiveness. But it's really great to think about because Dave and I here think that that is actually the most important thing in life. That it's what life is, one of the things that life is all about, and that actually brings meaning and the solution to the biggest problem in our world. Now, Dave, we've got some questions that we'd love to go through. So the first one is, well, okay, so is there a cutoff point to God and asking for forgiveness? You know, well, what if I decided that I wanted to, live all of my life just, rejecting God, living all of my life ignoring God, but then at the last minute I'm going to turn? Or what about the second before I'm standing in front of God after I've died already?
Yeah. Well, there's a few ways of answering this. The first way is to say God is gracious. The kind of God who in his goodness would send his own son to die for sinful people is the kind of God who has made massive steps already to give us something we don't deserve, right? So yes, you do have time. The thing that I would say is that you don't know how much time you have, right? So the last part that you went to, that idea of, well, just the second before you stand before God and you kind of you somebody else is in front of you and you're about to
Next in the
imagining
line,
that, right? That's too late. The Bible makes it clear that men and women are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment. Hebrews 9:27, and so we will go and meet God in judgment, and that's when it's too late. And so you've got this life to do it in, and the thing that, and I would say that this last year has shown us as much as any other time has, is that you do not know how long you have, and there's something. So I would say, yes, God is patient with us. And while you're breathing, there is still time for you to turn to Jesus. The thing would be is if you know that is the answer for your eternity, this is what I personally don't. Why would you wait? Like, it's not like you're gambling with your house. It's not like you're gambling with your car and such that if you lose this gamble, you lose your car, you lose your house. You're gambling with your eternity. Because you're wanting to buy some more time to do what? So I think I'd just say if you know in your heart that this is something you need to respond to, well, you respond to it. That's wisdom, I would have thought, not waiting off. So God is gracious, but you don't want to presume on that graciousness and potentially leave it too late. And once you die, it is too late. The other sort of thing is that I've heard it before. If I could live the life I want to live, whatever that means, and then at the very last minute, I'm going, I'm about to die. Okay, coach. God's not an idiot. He knows, right? If you go, I don't mean this at all. I'm just saying it now because I think saying
Hedging
the
my
sentence,
bets.
God, please forgive me, even though I don't actually feel it, is going to be real. As if he's going to fall for that one anyway. But there's a sense of, why do you think you'd change then? Practice makes perfect, and if you get really good and practiced at pushing God away and saying, I'm not interested, what makes you think you're going to do something differently later?
Yeah, no, it probably also...
Don't do it.
Yeah, it probably also ties into what you were saying last week as well about where the good life is found. And that actually those things that we think are going to give us the good life actually
they're not. So you spend your whole life devoting yourself to things that are going to prove empty. Why would you do that when you can actually know God and live a life that has meaning and purpose, and that is going to produce things that might have an impact for eternity? Why would you trade that life for a life of something you can't take with you? and risk your eternity to do it. It doesn't make sense. But thankfully, we've got a gracious God who deals with foolish people like us.
Yeah. Another question. So you brought up this illustration of like a ladder. And so, there were some people in the middle, you were saying, and, like, sure, maybe Jesus at the top or whatever, and that, we might be down the bottom.
With Tom Hanks.
with all of everyone, yeah. Is there a way that, well, okay, so if the Bible says I'm down the bottom, can I work my way up?
Just climb the ladder, right?
Yeah, like it's a common saying, isn't it? It comes out, can I just make myself a better person and God will be happy with that?
Yeah, look, that's the sad and unfortunate solution that so many people have come up with this for so much of history. It's the kind of this time I'll do it right? I'll get it right from now. I will do better. I'll just try harder. Here's where that's the wrong paradigm, I guess you could say. If you imagine it, let's just say it'd be like me saying, I've stolen 5 cars. I've sold 500 grams of ice to children at a primary school. But now I'm going to stop selling ice to children at a primary school. I'm going to stop stealing cars, and that will all go away. That's not the real world. You've done some serious stuff that needs to be held to account, right? So the problem with this way of thinking of I'll just get better, I'll just climb the ladder, is it doesn't undo what you've done. So yes, there's the question of, well, what do I do from here? And is what I do from here better than what I did before? But there is still what I did before. And justice means that that's got to be dealt with. But there's the second thing, and that is, what on earth makes you think that if I just try hard, I will get it all right from here? I might be better than I was then, but the real world that we know and we experience and we know ourselves is just try to be. We'll set an experiment. Why don't for the next 7 days you try to be perfect and just see how it works? I don't think you'll succeed. I don't think you will succeed. I think when you look back, you'll know you haven't succeeded. And so it kind of means we've just got to get rid of that way of thinking and sort of go, it just doesn't work, and I'm not going to be able to do it. And so to try and think that this is what my solution is going to be is just not right, especially when there is God's grace in the middle of it that just says, I know you can't do it. What you need to do is you need to ask me for forgiveness, and that's how it gets dealt with. You need Jesus to take it all away, rather than trying to make up and fail at it.
That draws nicely into our next question, which is, so if we're not, like, if we can't be perfect from here on, that actually implies that we're going to keep on stuffing up. How can God think about forgiving us if we're going to keep on stuffing up, if we're going to keep on sinning against Him?
Yeah. So this is and I'm sure we're going to cover this in future weeks, but the reality is that God knows precisely what we're like, and so it's not like if I say sorry now and then make a mistake tomorrow, I'm ruined. God knows I am. Even if I do say sorry now that I, even trying to do what's going to please Him, I'm still going to make mistakes. I'm still going to do wrong. That is the amazing thing about what Jesus done. If you remember that book illustration that I used, is that book is not just what I have done; it's what I will do. And so Christ died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, to bring you to God. and that's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18. And so that idea that he will do it and he will take it away, and he's done it once and he's done it for all time. And can I say how liberating is that, right?
Oh, extremely.
That it's not dependent upon my great efforts. It's dependent on what Jesus has done and him taking it all away, all of it. That is the wonderful freedom of the good news about Jesus.
To change the topic a bit, one of the things that people sometimes might bring up as one of the biggest problems in the world is simply just the problem of suffering.
Yeah.
Like there's just so much suffering in our world. There are bad things happen to us. We see bad things happen to the people that we love. There's all of this suffering that goes on in our world. So if God is good, why can't he just deal with the suffering?
Yep. Well, this relates to what we looked at last week and a bit about what we talked about today. The Bible would say that the cause of suffering is... I don't want to get controversial here on human caused climate change or whatever else like that, but certainly sin is human caused, and suffering is a result of the fact that we have broken things. Now you might go, yeah, but me being nasty to someone doesn't cause an earthquake, right? And that causes suffering. But the Bible says actually yes, it does. That there is that. God hasn't just said, oh, you've all rebelled against me and, oh, well, I guess my good world is ruined. There is a sense where there is a consequence to that. And the consequence is that we live in a broken world. And we live in a broken world where suffering is a part of it, where death is a part of it, where sickness is a part of it. And that is all to testify to the fact that there's something wrong and there's something that needs dealing with. And so the thing would be is that's not, so there is a judgment aspect to the fact that we suffer, but that is not to say that God is callous or uncaring, because he is the one who steps into the world and he suffers himself. What we talked about today, Jesus dying on a cross to to suffer in our place, says that God cares about it. And that, in fact, God has done something decisive to deal with it. And so his death on the cross is paying for that, And so what we need to do is by it kind of is a promise as well that it's going to be dealt with ultimately. So if he deals with suffering, he deals with the cause of suffering. He steps in and he says, right, judgment day, right now. And when Judgment Day happens, it happens for everybody. And it happens for everyone equally. And so the day that suffering finishes is the day that sin is dealt with finally. And if you're a sinner, you're part of the problem and you'll be dealt with. And so that is, though Jesus stepped in, he's actually dealt with it for us. But at the same time, there's a promise that if we put our trust in him, it's taken away from us. And then there will be a time when Christ returns. And we might talk about this in future weeks. But when Christ returns, and he will deal with it decisively once and for all. But that also means that sin's dealt with once and for all. And that's what's going to happen at the end. That's what's going to be so great about heaven, Henry, is the fact that there won't be any suffering and there won't be any sin that will cause it either.
To bring us back to the ladder illustration for a moment.
Yep.
It seems like, I don't know, for some people, it might be that it sits uncomfortably that we would be on this, or maybe to take us out of this, that someone who's lived a pretty good life, that they haven't stolen from anyone, they haven't murdered anyone, that they might have done some small bad things, but none of the big deals. None of the ones that would put someone in prison, or that we look at and go, oh, that person is a bad person. How can this like nice moral person be on the same rung as the worst people in society?
Yeah. Now, you do need to know there isn't a ladder, right? That's an illustration. Okay, so there is no celestial ladder where there's rungs on. It's a way of kind of saying that everyone has sinned, and that sin is very, very serious. I don't want to be said that your grandma is just as wicked as Hitler, right? Hitler was he was A grade when it comes to sinner. Like he was bad. But what I am saying is this: is that do you deserve God's judgment? And anybody, and this is where I want to refer to what I talked about last week. That certainly that idea that it's not just about how I say treat other people compared to others. How do I treat God? You know, God is the most perfect, righteous being in the universe. He's the one that we owe absolutely everything. And if I spend a lifetime saying, "Get out of my life," to Him, that makes me just as liable for judgment as somebody who does the same thing and does a whole lot of other bad stuff as well. I think it just says that where God is, we are so far from. Every single one of us has actually rejected Him, and the best of us have done it, and the best of us have also not done the right thing by other people. Sure, there's worse people, but if we think that we're going to escape God's judgment because of that, we're deceiving ourselves. And if I'm on rung 2 or rung 3 or rung 6, it doesn't, in my own mind, it doesn't matter. It's actually, am I deserving of God's judgment? And that judgment for actually committing a crime against the living God is a big crime to commit, right? And so that's where I think we need to do. We spend too much of our time looking at other people and comparing ourselves to them and going, well, I'm better than them. But the neglect of worship of the living God is a huge thing to do. And the important thing is, God thinks it's a huge thing to do, and He's the one that we're going to answer to. So it's getting our measure right, and it's understanding, and it's getting our crimes right, and that the biggest crime is actually to reject the living God who gave you life in the first place.
Well, maybe we might go on to our last question.
Last question
for the night.
Yep.
Which is, well, so if God made us, and none of us are good enough for His standard, if we've all done bad, if we're all falling short, then sure, isn't it God's fault for making us bad? Like it seems like He could have just made us good enough to be able to meet His standard.
Oh, sure. God could have made us robots. He could have made us programmed in such a way that we always just, input, output, robotic. That's not the way relationships work. Imagine if somebody had to love you. They loved you because they had to. They had no choice. That they thought that they looked up to you and thought that you're wonderful because you made them do it. That's not a relationship that any of us want. We want people to love us and to value us because they think that we're someone that is worth loving and valuing. And God has made humanity to relate with Him. He wants a creation that it has got a mind, that has got wisdom, that has got an ability to do A or to do B. And so but there's a cost that's come with that. And that cost is that when we've chosen to do B, that has had devastating consequences. And so yes, God could have made us robots, but He didn't. he's made people to relate with him, and that relating is a real thing. It's not a fake thing that's programmed like some sort of computer. And and at the end of the day, I don't. When I do things wrong against people, it's because I've chosen to do it, and I might have tried to come up with a rationalization for why I did it or whatever. So, but I know I did it. It was my choice. I can't sit there and blame God for the things that I knew I did. I can't blame God for the things that I should have done that I didn't do, because I did them, or I didn't do them. And so it's one of those kind of things that we bring in, that somehow we want to find God to blame for making us and giving us the wonderful privilege of being beings that have choices and make decisions and have wisdom and sovereignty. We just resist the fact that we're accountable for that.
I think that's all of the questions that we have time for tonight. But if you're listening in and you have more questions, then feel free to text the question line. And in fact, if you're watching during the week because you weren't able to join us actually on Monday night,
send through your questions on the text
send them
line
through, and we'd love still to have a look at them
week.
and tackle them next week. Well, I really enjoyed tonight listening at what we have to say about what is the biggest problem in the world. And we heard that actually the biggest problem is the human heart, and that we've chosen to not love God and not love our neighbour. And that causes all sorts of problems.
Consequences.
And all of the problems that we look at and go, well, that's the biggest problem in the world. It seems to be the heart of the problem. But then we also heard the great news that there is a solution. That the solution is Jesus, who died on the cross so that forgiveness could be on offer. Well, I'm really looking forward to next week, where next week we're going to hear almost what's the next part of the story. Because if Jesus died, well, did he stay dead? We're going to be looking at that and looking at an event in history which is potentially the most important as to whether we can actually trust Christianity and trust God and trust the Bible, etc. Where if we can prove that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, this will all be for nothing. So bring your questions next week. We'd love to answer them and love to think more about what life is all about with you. Well, I guess we'll see you guys next week.
See you next week.